On to our next speaker, who is no less impressive. Kash Ghedia is the CIO at Welcome Break. For those of you who don't know this, Welcome Break operates motorway services and hotels across the country's motorways. I can't imagine we have that many people using them at the moment, since you're not allowed to drive anywhere. So I'm sure they've had to be very innovative in the way they operate. Kash is going to speak to us about his experience. He's delivered around 80 projects a year, and he will share advice around how to meet the requirements from the top of the organisation, which I imagine can be quite challenging during a pandemic. So over to you, Kash.
Thanks a lot, and hi guys. So I'm Kash. I'm the CIO at Welcome Break, and I'll probably give you a little bit of a whistle-stop tour in terms of, my journey over the last 2 and a bit years, and how we've probably transformed the business from being one which was probably behind the times in IT to probably being leaders in some of the things that we've launched over the last 12 to 18 months. So really, I think the few things I wanted to probably talk about, one was around, when you sort of, I guess, take the helm of being a CIO, I think one thing to understand is that you've got sometimes competing people around the table. So you've got to realize that you've got operators who actually have their own views on how they want to operate their sites. You've got the commercial director and the commercial team who have loads of ideas and that they want to deliver yesterday. And then you've got the temperament of the finance team and the marketing team. So my approach when I joined Welcome Break was to set the tone, and the tone was really 3 simple words, which was clear, simpler, and faster. And by this, I mean, making sure that, IT operate in a clear and efficient manner. That's the communication to our peers, but also the solutions that we deliver into our business. Also at the same time, simpler, meaning that we basically build solutions that are MVP. And effectively by that, what I mean is, don't sit there and try and build a solution that's going to be, that will take, months to build and create, but build something that is, quick and easy to quickly understand. Just 1 second. Sorry, I've got the little one with me, so apologies there, as we all probably do with COVID. So effectively, the clear, simpler, and faster approach is really about getting things done in a clear way, deploying it in a way that doesn't mean that we take a lot of time, and then faster, making sure that we deliver to the business needs in the time frame that the business requires us to do so. The other piece that I kind of worked on is making sure that IT was positioned as an enabler. And in a lot of organizations, kind of IT gets looked at as the bottleneck, the place where dreams aren't made, but they get stuck and they don't come to fruition. So here, we kind of repositioned the team, and I think that's quite important to touch on the team. Making sure that we've got a team that's got a clear purpose and vision, not of just IT and what they do, but the business and the direction that we're going in. And so we kind of rebuilt and re-energized the team. We made sure that we had direct team members who are aligned to each vertical of the business, which was very important. So we make sure that the communication and the workload was clear and concise, and people were well informed. And then I think on top of all of that, what we ended up doing was also kind of making sure that we put a good foundational layer into the business in terms of IT. So we didn't spend a lot of time continuously putting sticky plasters and fixing things. And by that, I mean moving a lot of our legacy infrastructure and hardware more over into a SaaS-based model, and outsourcing where we need to. And by this, I mean, focusing the team on things that basically generate ideas and revenue rather than spending time continuously putting sticky plasters and checking if a backup has happened, because those things are very, very important in any organization. But if most of your team are focused on trying to keep the lights on, there isn't a lot of innovation that's happening on the forefront. And your peers will probably see that. And that's how IT tends to sometimes become a bottleneck rather than an enabler. So what we did is we spent probably a good 12 months making sure that we kind of basically redesigned our architecture in terms of our apps and our infrastructure to making sure that they were kind of, I guess, less the focus on my team and more the focus about delivery and projects. As I mentioned before, we've delivered about 80 projects a year. They're all different sizes, from sort of, our own click and collect app and, kiosks with, a bit of AI and machine learning, to really simple tactical things that we had to do with COVID, as most of you guys are aware, such as the Eat Out, to help out, track and trace, those sort of things where a lot of businesses kind of went, gosh, we've got to spin these things up within days, which would normally take probably months of ideation. And here again, we kind of, took the bull by the reins and sort of said, well, actually, what's the quickest way that we can actually get these things done? Well, we've got a great CRM tool. Why don't we just basically redesign that slightly to basically do track and trace? So again, it's about basically, doing tactical wins, using sometimes the tech that you have and repurposing it rather than rebuilding it from scratch. And I think that's sometimes quite important. And with, I think some IT organizations, they get too bogged down in the detail. Like, they'd get the brief and say, we need to do a track and trace. Well, let's start with the whiteboarding of what this is. Now, are we going to build this ourselves? Well, actually, look at the tools that you have today, and could you repurpose and refashion what you've got to getting those things done? And that's what we kind of did in terms of the last 12 to 18 months, is making sure that, where we can actually be clever with the tools we have, we've done that. Where we've basically wanted to deliver something that's transformational, we've picked partners that are as hungry and as enthusiastic as us to getting it delivered. There's nothing worse than sort of picking a partner that says they can do everything, but spends 3 months drawing up the detailed design document of what that product should be. So I think it's really important that in a clear and simpler and faster approach, that when you're even building solutions, that you pick the right partners that are hungry, capable, of course, and are aligned to your business in terms of your timelines and your strategy. So I think that's quite key. Another thing around, I guess, tactical wins is, and this is quite a simple one for a lot of IT leaders, but it's make sure that your colleagues have the right tools. Sometimes perception of IT can be basically driven by the laptop that an individual has, or a mobile phone he or she carries. And that's another thing that we kind of tackled straight off, which was, let's make sure that we create a modern workplace that allows our teams to communicate. So we brought in a full Microsoft stack within the business, including Teams telephony, including Teams meeting and video calls, as most of you guys have today. But we also provided, an agnostic approach. I think the world where everyone must have a Microsoft laptop are probably quite limited. So what we did is we sort of went to the end users and said, right, what is it that, what are the tools that you'd love to use to do your job, and what could help you do it in the best way possible? And out of that, we drew up a list, and we sort of ended up with, a handful of users in a camp that wanted MacBooks, the others wanted Windows machines, and we made sure that we picked the right hardware. And I think to the previous speaker's comments, yes, there's cost cutting, but make sure you cut your costs where in a tactical way. So make sure that, when it comes to buying kit, such as laptops, which every individual in your organization is going to be using, make sure you pick something that's actually going to, test it, basically be resilient enough and last over the next 2-3 years. Because those sort of little important tactical wins do help the perception of IT. And as I said before, I think, make sure you tend to have an evergreen approach. And by that, I mean, implement solutions that, are as good as the day you put it in a year ago. And that's by going through, SaaS-based applications, if possible. I think years ago, the view was, well, I've got a data center in-house, I'm just going to lift and shift into the cloud. I think that's kind of moved on. A lot of software vendors today have SaaS-based products, adopt those, spend less time sort of then on the maintenance part of it, because that's what those providers do. And then also, I think the final bit I think I'd like to just touch on is communication. And I think this is really, really key. Communication is really key in the sense of what is IT doing? Demystify that team in the corner by making sure that you provide clear communication. At Welcome Break, we tend to have a weekly pack that goes out to the whole business. We're really clear on every single project and actually what we've completed that week. Now, I know that might sound frightening to people who like to work with long time scales and 5 cups of coffee. But I think from my perspective, the operators around the business that you're working with are all of a mindset of having to deliver numbers and make that business profitable. And you've got to align to that and make sure that you are delivering every week. So my recommendation on that is making sure that you provide clear communication, not to your peer group, but also to everybody else who's probably going to be involved or want an interest in what IT are doing. And that also helps then bring, I guess, the perception of IT of being, right, I don't know what those guys are doing in that corner of that office, to I know what they do every week because I see a pack that arrives with 3 of my projects on it and the percentage complete. So I think those are kind of the key, I think, items that I'd probably cover. So, have a clearly defined strategy that isn't, laborious. Make sure that you adopt something that's, in my tagline, it was clear, simpler, faster, but pick something that shows pace and be able to deliver at pace clearly. Make sure you hire the right talent. As I mentioned before, there's nothing worse than having the wrong talent in the team that doesn't share the vision and the purpose that you or the business have. Tactical wins, as I mentioned, is very important. Make sure you invest in a evergreen approach, as I call it. So you spend less time, fixing and plumbing things and monitoring to actually driving a team that actually focuses on building and innovating. And then, as I said, communication. Make sure you have clear communication. And so that's kind of my probably top tips around, managing around the board table as well as the peers beneath you.
Thank you very much, Kash. That was really interesting, and I love the little interruption from your child. I think it's a very true representation of how life is during the pandemic for all of us.
Absolutely. Thankfully, they're all going back to school in a week's time, so that's a good thing.
Yeah. Now you mentioned, not putting sticky plasters and fixing things and moving away from legacy, and I think that's something many companies find challenging, particularly if you're locked into contracts and things like that. So how do you deal with that and get around that?
I think what you've got to show is value, right? At the board level, what they want to understand is what's the value of doing this. And if you're able to articulate that in a clear and concise manner, that, actually, I've got 4 people here today that continuously do the same job day in, day out, and they're not driving any value, but they're just basically there kind of keeping the lights on. But if I was to actually repurpose this and get those 4 individuals to start innovating and creating solutions that help drive some of those commercial initiatives, that's going to probably provide you value as a business. And once you start talking about, value creation, creating a team that starts delivering more for the business or can deliver more for the business by sort of not having to do those things, you're probably pushing at an open door. The only thing else I would probably say is cost is obviously quite important. And that, I would say, is make sure that you go in with a clear agenda around costs and saying how you can probably cost neutralize that. The cost of operating my DC in-house with a team of X is call it 50K. If I move to the cloud, it's probably going to cost me 70K, but the 20K, I'm going to make it up by creating additional value propositions within the business that will supersede that additional cost. And I think if you start talking in that language, that probably helps your colleagues.
Yeah, the language of money always works.
Yeah.
And you talked as well about, having to spin stuff up really quickly within days, like the COVID stuff. Have you had to change your processes around testing and things like that to be able to build stuff quicker? How do you factor in that risk versus?
Yeah, so I think everything we do, we put a risk rating on it. And, things like, for example, the track and trace that we had to implement, yes, we could have gone to the market, we could have started speaking to vendors, gone through the whole, process of procurement and then delivering it into the business. But that would have taken us months. So what we did is we repurposed our CRM platform that we'd already done the due diligence. We have, all these sort of GDPR compliant stuff already in terms of customer data. And we said, hey, let's talk to the vendor and see if they can actually just build a front end to it to capturing people who come onto our sites in terms of a form, which we were able to knock up within probably 2 days, ingest that into the CRM platform, refashion the back end slightly, and away we went. And I think that's sometimes where you've got to think outside of the box and don't sort of pigeonhole yourself into, right, I've got a defined IT process that means I must follow all these things. You've got to sometimes think out of the box, make sure that you keep risk in mind. There's nothing worse than rushing things through and suddenly creating an issue downstream. So, where possible, if it's low risk, be tactical in how you do it, and look for, quick wins, as I say.
Yeah, no, that's really a good way to go about it. And I think you mentioned as well, having the right talent to be able to do this. And I just had another quick question for you. Has anyone unexpectedly shown and stood out during the pandemic, among staff, and how do you motivate staff to continue?
Sure. So I think there's two questions there, really. One is, the pandemic, which, nobody foresaw, and that obviously changed the team dynamics. And I'm sure a lot of IT leaders saw that, how do I get my team still motivated and firing on all cylinders and delivering at pace, especially like a business like us that didn't close, we were open throughout the pandemic. And, we did that through a lot of collaboration, so we would have chalk talks on Mondays. We'd have my direct team having their one-to-one still on Teams. We'd have sometimes, a Friday, just coffee afternoon, talk about anything, just to keep the team sort of, I guess, sort of aligned and together in terms of vision and purpose. And then, I think the other thing is hiring the right talent. I think that's really important because when you decide to align yourself to the business that wants to run at speed, you've got to have a team that also share the same purpose, vision, and values. Because if you don't get that right, no matter how hard you try, you probably won't be able to affect the change at the pace that you want. And I think that's just about finding people who are absolutely as hungry as you are to, deliver change and see the transformation of the business. And I think that's a huge part to that plays a part in the DNA that what we've set up at Welcome Break.
Great. That's been really interesting, Kash, and I will continue to pick your brains during the panel later on.
No problem.
But now we're going to move on to our next speaker,